Hello and welcome back to ShameOver. So glad you're here. Today I am with Emily Romero and I am so excited. We will be talking about her book, Trust Yourself, if it's, you can kind of sort of see it there. And we are gonna jump right in. So Emily, if you want to
Yeah.
say hello, introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me
And yeah,
too.
like you said, I'm Emily Romero. I was a therapist for a long time, closed down my practice last year. Now I've been writing books and sharing my work in different ways. So excited to talk about it today.
Yay, me too. And I know I've shared this with Emily, but so this book, you'd given me a copy when we had seen each other, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really read books. I do the audio version. Wanted to try to get into it, and the first night, I think I read like 125 pages, which again, this is insane for me. I don't read, like physically read books. So that's to me just very telling of like how natural writing is for you and how good this book is.
Mhm.
So tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah. Yeah. So this book is really a culmination of a lot of things. So a lot of my work as a therapist was spent, I was a somatic trauma therapist. And so I really worked with women, particularly around complex trauma, attachment wounding, things like that. But really looked at it through the lens of how our experiences got stored in our body.
Mhm.
And yeah, through lots of years of working with people, started to see this pattern that whatever people were coming into therapy for, whatever words that they were saying in the first session, when we actually got underneath it all, the thing at the heart of it was that they were not trusting themselves. And so they were lacking this self trust. And when I reflected on my own life and I realized, like, oh, yeah, that was so much of my own journey of not trusting myself and being insecure, second guessing myself and doubting everything that I did. And so looking at, okay, if the core is they're not trusting themselves, how do we get there? How do we bridge that gap to developing that self trust, knowing that it's not going to be as simple as me telling them, hey, just trust yourself. Like, here's the
Right.
answer. Ding, ding, ding. It's like, it's not that easy. So even when I hear people say, like, yeah, just trust your gut, it's like, I love that sentiment, but like, it's harder than that. It's not an easy thing to just trust your gut, especially if you've experienced any type of painful experience or trauma, which dysregulates your nervous system. And then it's really hard to know what is my intuition, what is anxiety, what is fear, what is all these things get jumbled up in our system. So it's not as easy as just trust your gut. And so really what I wanted to start to do was to make it simpler on all of us. And so it's like, okay, the answer is to trust yourself. How do we actually do that? Knowing that it's going to be a unique journey for everybody. And so really distilled it down to these four principles that create the self-trust model. And so there's a compass that helps guide you through those principles. And so I started to do this work with my individual clients. Then I brought it into a group space and I started to run these retreats, what I called Adventure Club. And we would really incorporate these elements in a community setting in this small group, intimate environment, which was just exponentially powerful to do this work with other women who were also on a similar path. And then after doing that for a few years, that's why I said I ended my practice last year, closed down my practice to be able to bring this in a different way to people. And so that took the form of putting it into a book, now speaking about it, and yeah, just bringing the model out for people to have their own kind of framework to follow on that journey back into themselves.
Yes, from a personal thing, it's been so huge just because similar to you, like I've kind of felt this self-trust building over the years to get me to where I am now, but I didn't really have the words for it. So you like
Yeah.
not only helped me see that, but so many of my clients, the one piece like why we can't get that breakthrough is the self-trust. And it's,
Yes.
hard for me because I know how I developed it over time, but like you said, it's everyone's journey is different and it's
Mhm.
really figuring out where you are, what you need to work on. I know you broke it down into the four pieces on the compass,
Mhm.
and for everyone, it could be a different starting place, like just knowing where you're
Yeah.
at. So
Mhm.
I think that this has been so crucial, and I want all of my clients to read it
Mm.
because I definitely think that this is huge for just them not only understanding themselves, but when it comes to obviously I work with women who are trying to get a better relationship with alcohol. And so much of the drinking, you lose the trust in yourself because you say, oh, I'm not drinking tonight, and then you do, or I'm only going to have one or two, and then you have more, so it's that constant, almost self-sabotage that
Yeah.
is, as I'm reading this, I'm just like, oh my God, like it's just the self-trust thing, but it's the
Hmm.
farther you get away from it, it's almost like as you start getting closer, you want to push it farther away because it's scary and it doesn't, like, literally that
Yeah.
gave me the chills saying that, but it
Uh-huh.
doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So if you want to jump in on that at all, what maybe comes
Yeah.
to mind for you?
Gosh, so many things. Yeah. Because, yeah, what you're saying is that I might have this goal that I want to, maybe reduce my alcohol use or, not drink a certain night or only drink a certain amount. But if I don't follow through on that, then it's eroding this trust. But I think specifically when it comes to like this framework and this model, what I really want to encourage people to do is look at, well, why is that your goal in the first place? Like really getting underneath and getting curious. Like that's a big part of this is slowing down and getting curious about yourself and really getting curious about where is that goal coming from in the like that very specific goal. Is that coming from somebody else that told me that's what my goal is supposed to be? Or is that really coming from within myself? And there's a reason that I'm deeply connected to why I want that to be what tonight looks like or what I want my
Mhm.
life to look like, because that's going to set you up for success more than if you are setting goals from a people pleasing part of you or from an avoidant part of you or
Mhm.
a competitive part. We have all these different parts, and if they're the ones setting our goals, then it makes sense that, like you said, self-sabotage comes in. And it might look like self-sabotage when really it's just like, well, that was never an aligned goal in the first place, so of course I don't want to follow through.
Yes, and that's such a great point because I mean, there's when it comes to drinking in particular, and this whole thing won't be just talking about drinking, but when it comes to drinking in particular, a lot of people, it's like the health goals or whatever, but they look at like the CDC has their guidelines and their doctor might have theirs. Like
Hmm.
there's so many different guidelines. And, I get the question a lot, like, how much am I supposed to be drinking? I'm like, that's not for me to tell you. Like, you do what
Yeah.
feels right for you because if I give you a number and it doesn't feel good, you're not going to do it. You might do it
Hmm.
for a short period of time, but it's not going to stick.
Yeah.
So figure out what moderation looks like to you at a place that feels good and then work towards that. And what you
Yes.
decided is today, a year from now, it could be completely different. So know that
Yeah.
it can be flexible and fluid. And that's kind of the beautiful thing that to me makes it that much easier and more empowering to, find that trust in yourself and to start
Mhm.
gaining that intuition back that I know a lot of us have really lost.
Yeah. Yes, so much yes to that. And also, it makes sense to me why we might have parts of ourselves that want rigidity and we want somebody just to give us no, but what is the right amount? What's the right number of drinks that I'm supposed to have so I can just follow that, because then I don't have to go inside and I don't have to reflect and really decide for myself what is because that question you asked, like what is moderation for you? Like that's actually a really big question and probably pretty confronting for a lot of people. And so it's
Mhm.
really doing that deeper inner work. It's not just a number of drinks, and that's going to be the magic fix.
Exactly. So, since I mean, a lot of people that are probably going to be drawn to this have no clue where to start, and even
Mhm.
that they're really so out of touch and out of tune. I know you had mentioned like, are you doing this out of people pleasing? Out of the competitiveness? Like, there's so many different factors there. Where do you even like begin to know like, maybe I'm a little off when it comes to my trust in myself?
Yeah, yeah. And I really start the book with laying some of that groundwork and really giving people an idea of like, is this book for me? And I start the book out very, very clearly, like, hey, just a heads up, this is exactly what the book is going to be about. Like, you get to decide if this book is for you, because it might not be for everybody. It's not for everybody. But really it's kind of starting to identify, am I lacking trust? And are there these things that I maybe don't even realize are connected to the fact that I'm lacking trust in myself? And so I kind of list out some of those, and some of those being like second guessing your decision or stuck in that place of indecision, which is so draining on our life force when you're just stuck in like this or this, I don't know, but you're stuck. Yeah,
And
you're not. I
that
want to pause there because you're just
Yes,
like,
I
yes.
mean, I see that so much with people because they're like, should I do like I don't know if I'm gonna have a booze-free night tonight or not. I don't know. Like it's the constant negotiation. I'm like, you just
Yeah.
gotta commit. Like figure
Yeah.
out what it is and then commit because otherwise you're just wanting And as long as we're wanting, we're going to be wavering. We're going to have that negotiation coming in and out, where when you commit, you're making that decision like, this is what I want. But to go a step further, is it in alignment with what is best for you without anyone else being involved at all?
Yeah. Yeah. Which leads me to another kind of sign that you might be lacking self-trust is if you are serving, 15 people in your life every time you want to make a decision and you're not going inside for the answers. You're looking external for the answer, whether it's an expert or, like you said, the CDC website. Maybe the CDC website has my answer for me. And it's like you're looking for the expert, you're looking for the answer outside of you, outsourcing your power versus trusting that you actually have wisdom inside that you can turn to.
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
So I know one thing that you touch on throughout the book is trauma.
Mhm.
And if we can touch on it a little bit, I'd love to, because I know that a lot of us, I mean, we've heard now, I think more common buzzwords are like
Mhm.
big T trauma or little T trauma, and really understanding that, and that so many of us like don't understand really that all of us have had trauma of some sort, but
Mhm.
kind of what that looks like, how that shows up for us, that type thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big topic for sure. And it's been an interesting thing to witness, like being in the trauma space and watching that evolution happen as, when I first got into the field, trauma wasn't something that we talked about. Definitely not in the mainstream, definitely not on, social media. Nobody was talking
Mhm.
about their trauma,
Yeah.
and to see that shift, especially over the last handful of years, and people are starting to recognize like, oh, okay, maybe I have had trauma. And then you kind of see it swing to the other side where people start to over identify with all of their trauma symptoms. And that's my trauma is all of who I am. And that's
Uh,
also keeping you paralyzed and stuck. And so it's just an interesting thing to witness. And so the way that I look at trauma, again, I look at trauma through more that somatic body based lens. And so my training is in somatic experiencing. And somatic experiencing really looks at nervous system health. And so it was formed by Peter Levine was actually looking at animals in the wild and how they responded to threats and looking at how animals in the wild are routinely threatened. Their actual existence is threatened on a daily basis, but they're not traumatized. And so us as humans, we actually are. We're traumatized all the time by physical threats, but also emotional and mental and spiritual threats and relational threats. We're traumatized because our nervous systems hold on to it. And so his perspective on trauma and the way that I've kind of began to approach trauma is it's not about the event itself. And so that's a really confusing thing for people because they're like, but I haven't had XYZ happen, so I haven't had trauma. It's like, we're not talking about the event itself. We're talking about the impact on the nervous system and the residue that's left behind. And as humans, we've trained ourselves out of letting our body release the trauma. And so we store it in our tissues, in our cells, in our body. That's how it continues to show up. And then something happens in our present day and we get activated and it's as if we're experiencing it in real time. And so that
mhm.
trauma gets activated in our system and we go into fight or flight. Our chest starts to pound and our heart rate goes up and it's as if we're reliving it in the moment. And so it's still there in our bodies. And that's why I was saying it's really hard to trust your intuition if you're in that stuck place of anxiousness or hyper arousal, because it's like, is this my anxiety? Is this actually a threat that I need to respond to? Or is this something from the past? Yeah.
Yes. And I feel like with just technology and especially social media today, we're so much more heightened than ever
Mhm.
before, and we don't
Yeah.
even realize it. So,
Yeah.
like, our baseline, we're probably supposed to be down here, and we're like living up here without even knowing it.
Yes, yes, 100%. And that's why, and we can maybe go through the compass at some point if that would be helpful, but south on the compass. So the compass, like I was saying, is the four kind of principles that really help guide you in trusting yourself more. And south on the compass is regulation. So that's nervous system regulation. And it's there at the base because it's so foundational to this work. Because exactly like you said, our baseline is way up here most of the time. Or for other people who've maybe learned to protect themselves by disconnection, that would
Mhm.
be more of like a freeze response, dissociation, numbness, lethargy, depression. It's like I'm actually more disconnected. And so the baseline is actually lower, but neither one of them are in a kind of optimal regulated state. And so the goal really from again, a foundational place is to give yourself the gift of a solid foundation and to start to treat your body in ways that can help support building capacity in your nervous system. And so some of that work is boring for people. It's like, what are you eating? How are you moving your body? What are you drinking water? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting sunlight? It's these boring things that are really fucking important, unfortunately. Like
Yes,
we have to do
exactly.
them.
Well, and even though that might be boring in my mind, like it's simple. So that
Yeah.
for those of us who do like the checklist, like they're
Mhm.
easy things to be like, did I sleep well last night? No, no, I didn't. Okay, I know that I might be off today. Am I
Mhm.
hydrated? Yes, I know I'm hydrated. I can go drink some water now. Like they're easy baselines that you can touch several times throughout the day.
Yes.
Obviously, some more than others.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, like you said, for people who do want a checklist, this is the one place where I give you a checklist. And I have these 5 areas of regulation. And actually somebody that I used to work with, she took this and like turned it into like a little widget on her phone and put
Oh,
the 5 areas of regulation. That way she was seeing it as like a screensaver every single day and checking to make sure like, okay, am I touching base with myself in every one of these areas every day? And noticing like, hey, I'm really off here. Yeah, my sleep was bad. Okay, what can I do to support my sleep tonight? And so it's just having that constant reminder of how important these 5 areas are.
yes. Well, and that goes into one thing that I've learned through my work, not only with myself and my own journey and experience, but so many of my clients, pretty much all of my clients are moms,
Mm-hmm.
whether they have young kids or older kids. But what I've seen is the drink at the end of the day is the first time that they've taken time for themselves that day. And, even if
Oh,
it's like for me, I'll work out first thing in the morning. So I might be up at 5:30 to get a workout in. So I'm taking that time. But after that, it's like kids, lunch, get, school, backpacks, all of that, and then work, and then get the kids back and all of that, and I finally have a second for myself. So I think that that has
yeah.
been not only obviously that's the habit forming thing that, okay, this is finally my way of saying it's the end of the day, I can take a break. But I think that's why so many women struggle with it, especially, if they have that witching hour,
Mhm.
because it's the only time that they're taking for themselves. So that's why I'm like, don't stop taking that time. Like, let's
Yeah.
do something else before having that drink, or, preferably without it. But you need to take a break. You need to tell your body that it's time for a pause. You need to connect with yourself. You need to check in and keep that ritual going. And I
Hmm.
noticed that the people who really struggle, especially with the white knuckling it, they're not taking that time. They're just sitting like being miserable and like all they're doing is thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like, do something good for your soul.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were talking, it makes me realize that drink, like you said, at the end of the day, that first glass of wine is like the first time they're exhaling all day.
Oh yeah, that is
Hmm.
it.
Yeah. And imagine, yeah, just like holding your breath, what that does to your system all day. And then finally, for the first time, I can exhale.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense then why you don't want to give that up. Like, and, and and really looking at the purpose that it serves, not just from a um substance perspective of like on that level, but like what is the ritual, using that word, like what is this ritual providing to you, and really getting curious to understand the part of you that's using that ritual. Because yeah, makes a lot of sense of like, this is how I exhale, this is the first time I can like be with myself. Yeah, it makes sense that you want to do this. And how can you have compassion for that part of you versus getting into a battle with that part and shaming that part?
Well, and I'm so glad you brought up shame because obviously
Yeah.
my business, Shame Over, like shame's a big thing that we deal with.
Yeah.
Again, especially as women. What is one thing that you would maybe encourage people who do feel a lot of shame, whether it's around this area or some other area in their life that they just can't seem to like get past that? One of my clients in particular, one of my dear friends, love her, but she had this epiphany a while back. She's like, I think I'm addicted to shame. Like,
Mm,
yeah, so big moment. So when it comes to
yeah.
shame, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. That's a super interesting like insight that she was able to get to. Because it kind of speaks to that like secondary gain that we can get from things. And like there's something that I'm getting from being in this cycle of shame.
Yeah,
And so understanding that, which again takes so much to slow down and actually be curious about that,
yeah,
um, which I think is interesting given the work that you do around alcohol, because so many times we don't want to slow down and get curious about who we are. We don't want to look at that. And so we can use alcohol as a way to cover that up and to numb that and to not have to look. And so it's like almost asking somebody to do the opposite of that is really scary.
Mhm.
And so a way that I approach working with shame or any of those other parts of us that we wish didn't exist, that we wish we could put into a dark corner of our psyche and never have to look at, is to do something that's kind of counterintuitive and actually bring more light to them and bring more compassion to them. And so that really comes from the internal family systems framework that I've been trained in. So if anybody's familiar with IFS or parts work, that's what I'm talking about here. So looking at, we're all very multifaceted. We're not these one-dimensional creatures, and we all have these different parts of ourselves. And so often we get in battles with these parts and we try to exile them. We try to get rid of them. We try to pretend they're not there. Um, and in my experience and what I've seen is that doesn't actually work. Wishing the shame wasn't there doesn't make it go away.
Mhm.
And so again, this approach is a more loving way of relating to our parts. And so it's actually turning towards these parts, the parts that we are most angry with, that feel the most destructive in our life, and turning towards them and offering them compassion. And again, that's this piece around curiosity and really trying to get curious about what's going on here. Like, when did you start showing up? How familiar is this part? And so I have a practice that I talk about in the book, and it's my favorite practice that I do as well, probably because I love tea. And so it's all about inviting these parts to tea. So
Mhm.
inviting your fear to tea, inviting your shame to tea, and actually inviting it in versus pushing it away, and sitting down and building a relationship with that part of you. And again, trying to understand this part and understand where it's coming from, and really looking at what role is this part serving in your life, and how has this part protected you? So really looking at, even with shame, of like, how has the shame protected you in some ways, and understanding that more. And the more you understand and build that relationship, that's building the trust. So it's building the trust between the part and yourself, which is building self-trust.
Yes. Well, and that's such a great point because there is some kind of payoff. Otherwise, we wouldn't be
Yeah.
doing it. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's a good or a healthy one, but there
Hmm.
is something. So, like the protective thing, a lot of us are protecting ourselves without even realizing that's what we're doing. And that's, where a lot of these unhealthy habits are coming in type thing. But
Hmm.
just, I did get to that part in the book with the sit down and invite them to tea because
Yeah.
most of the things that are scary to us are just because we don't know them. Like it's the
Yeah.
unknown. So once you
Yes.
actually, like you say, invite it in, get to know it, it's like, oh, that wasn't scary at all. Sometimes
Yeah.
it can still be scary, but digging in. And I
Yeah.
love the curiosity thing because that's one thing that I've learned myself and having young children. I'm like, be your own Doc McStuffins, like get curious. But
Yeah.
when you're curious, you cannot be judgmental,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
shame is pure judgment. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So when you meet yourself or anyone else with the curiosity, you're not going to have the judgment there because you're just like, oh, why is that? Like, but not from a judgmental place.
Yeah. Yeah. Like truly wanting to understand. And if you can go in with that understanding, that I know this part is protecting me in some way. This part has served a purpose in my life in some way. If you can tether to that, then sometimes you can then anchor into curiosity, because then you are trying to come from that place of, then let me understand this. Help me understand why and how this came to be. And again, sometimes these parts reveal things that are hard for us to hear, but it's important. And the more that trust is built and the more you understand this part, the more they get to settle. Because it's the same way, like, yeah, children, they want to be heard. And so if they're not being listened to, they're going to scream, they're going to get louder. So same way with our parts, they show up these behaviors, these patterns, the emotions, they get bigger and bigger until they're finally heard. And so once they're actually heard, intended to, and actually understood, then they're like, oh, okay, cool. I don't have to be so loud anymore. And it's like they get to settle. And then you, as like the wise, competent adult, get to have more of a voice, and you get to be the one making the decisions versus this part making the decision for you. And another visual that I offer to people is, once you start to build that part relationship, and what I've seen and what I've experienced is that you don't have to force compassion at that point. Like, once you really understand, the compassion naturally comes, and often it comes with gratitude. And you're actually like, wow, thank you so much for keeping me safe, for protecting me. And then once you get to that place, you can really let the part know, like, you've done so much work.
Mhm.
You're probably exhausted. Actually, let me take it from here, and we get to talk about like passing the baton. So letting this part know that you've done a great job protecting me and your services are no longer needed now. So you can actually pass the baton and you don't have to work so hard anymore. You can rest.
Yes, no, that's so beautiful. And I feel like I've felt that myself for sure. And especially like the compassion it is over time because,
Mhm.
trying to teach people that can be really hard. Trying to teach children that can be really hard.
Yeah.
But it's like one day you just kind of look back and you're like, wow, like I am a completely different person, in
Yeah.
the best of ways. But it's just that I think is granted that's kind of the whole point of the self-trust is having that compassion,
Hmm.
but that is just such a big piece in my mind of like the whole purpose of life is when you can have that love and compassion for yourself and others like
Yeah.
that there's nothing greater in life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this way of relating with your parts, once you start to genuinely have that compassion for your parts, it's actually
Mhm.
hard to stop that from rippling into other people. And you're like, oh, I actually have compassion now for these people in my life and their parts that are showing up. And yeah, like you said, that's, yeah, maybe the whole point of all of this.
Yeah, I don't know. That's something that always like strikes with me. One thing, and I'm curious if you feel the same way, but one thing that I've definitely noticed since like really getting into, life coaching and all of the work that I'm doing, which I know you are so much more experienced in so many different facets, but so much of what we are trying to learn as adults is what we're supposed to learn as children.
Mm,
And, just being, again, mom with young kids, I'm constantly seeing that, like, oh my God, like I know I was taught this, but I don't think I ever learned it or didn't learn it how
mm,
I needed to. But, talk
mhm,
about going back to the basics, like so much of what we need to do is all stuff that if we learned it when we were little children, we would
mhm,
be doing a lot better now as adults, I think.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which I think, at least what I've seen, is sometimes, again, that can be really confronting for people to realize, like, especially as your child gets to a certain age. And then it's like, oh, that's tapping into maybe some needs that weren't met for you at that age, or some wounding that happened at that age. And then it's like, oof, it's not just you as a parent, it's you as a child at that age that your child's at. And so then it does get really hard to navigate if you don't have, support, if you don't have some of this kind of these tools already. And so then it does make sense that, like, how can I get away from this for even just, an hour? So it's like, oh yeah, wine. Okay, I'm going to do something to just kind of remove myself from this discomfort for a little bit. So it makes a lot of sense. And again, if we can approach all of these behaviors as like it makes sense in context, that's where again we can really tap into that compassion again.
Yes. And I don't know if you're super familiar or you have experience working with highly sensitive, deeply feeling people, or I know that's kind of, more of a buzzword, but it's something that I've really started digging into the past probably 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
My therapist had said, like, I think your daughters might be highly sensitive. You should look into
Mm.
it. And I'm like, I mean, I am like, this is describing me and she is me.
Yeah.
And this is why this is such a challenging relationship
Yeah.
because, like, I'm raising myself all the things that were like, taught out of me, don't do
Yeah.
that, don't be like that, da da da. So that has been like a very challenging thing, but I'm starting to realize a lot of the women that I work with are falling more on the highly sensitive side of things.
Mm-hmm.
That again, drinking has become a way to like shut it off just for a second. And that's
Yeah.
where I'd love your
Just like
thoughts
turn down
because
the volume a little bit. This is too
exactly.
extreme. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like we're just taking everything in and it feels so much more intense for us. And, is what I'm starting to really focus on is the nervous system regulation. So, is that something that you think really goes hand in hand, especially when it comes
Mhm.
to people who everything is so loud and blaring and you just need the pause and the reset? What would you
Mhm.
recommend there?
Yeah. 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 I think there is quite a few elements there, and probably with everything, it's not like a one approach, but I think that instincts that you have around like coming back into the body and the nervous system and finding tools and practices that help bring some regulation are going to be crucial. And And again, the goal with nervous system regulation, I never want to paint the picture that the goal is to be like this, zinned out monk on the mountaintop and just like, oh,
Yeah.
everything is perfect. It's like, no, life is going to happen. We're going to have ups and downs. The goal with nervous system regulation is to be able to have the capacity to come back. And so it's like, yes, we're going to get charged and we're going to come out of our window of tolerance. We're going to get spiked and we're going to get anxious. We're going to, get low and numbed out. And then it's like, what do we do to come back? What's our resiliency to come back into a state of regulation? And so again, it's not about getting a flatline existence. That to me doesn't sound very fun, but it's like, can we come back when life happens? Do we have tools to bring us back into a space of more regulation, more connection with ourselves and connection with our loved ones? Because at the heart of it, we all are animals, and we thrive in connection. We're built for connection. And so I think, yeah, again, your instincts to bring in some of that regulation seems really spot on. And then also another element of like the self-trust framework that I think would be really crucial is this knowing yourself piece and really getting to know the part of you that maybe identifies as highly sensitive, or what does that actually mean for you? Because again, that's a kind of a blanket term that could mean different things for different people, but what does that actually look like for you? And getting to know that part, inviting that part into tea, and like, how does that show up in your life? When did that part first start showing up? And again, really getting curious about the part of you that is sensitive, that does feel things really big. I think that's the language I use a lot with people, is like feeling things really big. And it's like, sometimes we have stories about what that means. And so it's like, can we understand what those stories are? And also that they're just stories.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have a story that makes us bad, that we're wrong, we're too emotional, we're too this, we're too that, because we feel things deeply, we feel things big.
Yeah.
But can we understand those stories and have some compassion for those stories? And then again, the more you're building this relationship with that part, the more, again, just naturally that compassion and care and fondness for and appreciation for this part can start to naturally come to the surface.
Yeah.
And then it looks different when you're operating in the world. And yeah, I'm a deep feeler and I feel things big. And like, that's actually my superpower. That's a different story than I'm broken and I'm wrong and I'm too much.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's one thing that definitely I'm hypersensitive to with my daughter, because I
Yeah.
don't want those stories in her head that, for better or for worse, I've had, that I'm working through as,
Mm-hmm.
I'm approaching 40. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know. So for people who it's just like the thought of even trying this is just so like overwhelming and intimidating and all of that. One thing that I recommend to people is BYOB, be your own bestie. And
Hmm.
would you suggest that that could be a good way to kind of start the process as you're trying to get to know yourself? Because a lot of times, if we've been putting ourselves off for so long, we can't even get in that mind frame. But when we think about it, like if this was your best friend, what would you say, or what would you do, or what would your
Mm-hmm.
best friend say or do for you? I find that that can be kind of helpful. Do you think that
Mm-hmm.
that's a good
Mm-hmm.
way, at least like to dip your toe if needed?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that approach. And again, that framework I think can really shift things for people, that perspective of like, how would I care for somebody else that I love?
Mhm.
And thinking about that relationship with yourself as, the most important relationship. So how would you treat other important relationships in your life? And how can you bring some of that energy to yourself? I think sometimes it's that idea of self-love and you have to love yourself, and that's, to me, it feels very pressure inducive, like really like, and again, bypassing something almost like inauthentic in some ways when people talk about self-love. And so I
Absolutely.
struggle with that. And so I more so encourage people to explore like, what is a loving way of relating to yourself versus like putting
Mhm.
this pressure of like, I have to love myself. And it's like, that's a lot. But what's a way that you could love and lovingly relate to yourself today? What would that look like?
Oh,
And
I
just
love
starting
it.
there.
That is beautiful. So what, I know that you had touched on the compass. What are, if we want to jump into that, what does the compass
Yeah,
look like?
yeah. Let
And
me let me do like, yeah, just a quick overview for your audience. So, north on the compass is radical honesty, and so just the same way that if you're out in the wild and you're lost, I encourage people to start with north. And so really, again, it's designed like a compass because it's not a 4-step solution that you do one time and then you're done. You're going to have to go to all these directions many times throughout life. And you can actually start in any direction that you want if you know where you're facing. But if you don't know where you're facing, that's when you have to line up on north first. And
Okay.
so north is all about getting radically honest with yourself. And so this is, again, getting really real about, who you are, what you want, if you can or cannot trust yourself, and this idea that we don't trust people who lie to us.
Mhm.
And so it's the same way when we're talking with ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves if we want to build trust with ourselves. And even little white lies can erode trust. And so
Yes.
it's really looking at that more radical honesty piece of even the things that are hard to hear, hard to know, hard to tell ourselves. That's really where the trust is going to be built. But you don't have to do it all at once. All this can
Mhm.
happen in layers. And there's a good chance that you're not ready for all the depths of radical honesty that are possible right at the beginning. So like you don't have to go there. So giving
Mhm.
yourself permission of like, what level of honesty am I ready for right now? And that
Yeah.
can be enough. East on the compass is keeping promises. So we kind of touched on that a little bit. And it's the idea of following through. So doing
Mhm.
what you say you're going to do. And that's how we learn that we can trust other people when they follow through, and we learn that we can trust their word. And there is nuance to this. And we alluded to this a little bit, that if sometimes you actually have to break a promise in order to come back into integrity with yourself. And so it's
Mhm.
not as black and white of always follow through and you trust yourself, don't follow through, you lack self-trust. Because again, if you're making promises from a place of you're people pleasing or caretaking or competitive, and you're not following through, there's probably a reason. And so it's sometimes you have to break a promise, come back actually in touch with what do I actually want? What's true for me? What's aligned with who I am and my values and this season of my life, and setting goals and intention and commitments from that place, and then following through on those. So again, just a little nuance there.
Yeah, no, I love that because what like really stood out for me with that is that that piece is even more powerful than I think I realized
Mm.
because with when we are people pleasing or doing things just because we have to, a lot of times we can be like, well, I should have self-trust because I'm doing the things I say I'm going to do, but it's not, your intuition is saying this isn't right.
Yes.
So it's almost harmful in a sense
Yes.
by continuing to do that because you're working against your self-trust as you're doing that.
Absolutely. 100%. And I'm glad you picked up on that because I actually break that up in the book into two kind of separate sections of people, like on a spectrum. If there's people who are really struggling to follow through, and
Mhm.
that is why they're lacking self-trust, or on the other end, you have people, I follow through on
On
everything
everything.
to a fault.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I still don't trust myself. It's like, so why am I not trusting myself? I follow through on everything. And it's like, so it's getting into the nuance of that and looking at the growth edges on those opposite ends of the spectrum are going to look different.
Yep.
And so the person over here who's following through to a fault, it's not going to be helpful just to continue to follow through arbitrarily without looking at what are you following through on and why.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. Whew. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I love that piece because I think that one can get kind of oversimplified, and it's a nice little soundbite of like, oh, keep your promises and trust yourself. It's like, yes, and
But
there's
yeah,
more.
exactly.
And then south on the compass we talked about, which is nervous system regulation. So again, this is that idea. It's really difficult to trust your intuition when your nervous system is dysregulated. So starting with the basics, bringing in some baseline capacity in your nervous system, and then build from there. And the more that you have a baseline of nervous system regulation, the more you're going to be able to discern which practices you want to do from there. Because there's a lot. I mean, Google nervous system regulation, you're going to come up with all sorts of tricks and hacks and all these people that are guaranteeing things. Once you have a baseline, again, you're going to better be able to discern what practices are for you and which ones are not, and then
Yeah.
where you want to go deeper. And then west on the compass is knowing yourself. So again, this is this idea that we don't trust strangers inherently,
Mm.
especially with the deepest and darkest parts of ourselves. That trust is built over time and by getting to know people deeply. So it's the same with us. We have to really get to know ourselves, start to, again, allow some of that compassion, maybe even some caring for ourselves in a loving way, and then the trust forms over time.
Oh, that is amazing. I know you said that there's so many different things for the nervous system regulation, but is there one for you personally that you find is an
Mm.
easy go-to?
Well, so I really, really, I really lean on those 5 areas of regulation that I talk
Mhm.
about. And
Yeah.
so, yes, I, have been trained and I have tried many different hacks and practices, but in terms of consistency, and that's really what it comes down to for me, is those 5 areas. So again, those 5 areas are fuel. So how are you fueling your body? Food, water, supplements. How are you moving your body? Also, on the counter side is how are you resting your body? So the area is movement, but it's also being honest with yourself about like sometimes you need less movement, sometimes you actually need rest.
Yeah.
And then sleep, sunlight, and then connection. So connection would be connection with others, connection with nature. And so again, I really rely on those basics. It's not just a thing that I preach to people and don't do it myself. Like I really rely on those basics and make sure that I'm touching in on every area of those every day. And then, yes, there's going to be times when then I bring in some yoga practices or some breathing practices, body work. Body work's really a pivotal thing for me, but it's not something I'm necessarily doing every day.
Sure.
And so it's like really relying on the basics of every day and being consistent.
Well, and I love that you bring in the connection piece because I know a lot of the ones that I've seen do focus on all those other factors
Mhm.
when a lot of times we do. I find we either need to connect with someone, like, someone else, nature, like
Mhm.
you said, or we need to connect with ourselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that piece alone, my number one recommendation to people is before they drink, do something from, I call it your PS list, but basically come up with a list that everything that brings you pleasure, everything that helps reduce stress, and do
Mm,
something on that list first. Because a lot of
yeah.
times we're trying to drink for reasons that really we're trying to find pleasure or we're trying to reduce stress. Sometimes both, so
Hmm.
that just doing something from there can really help. But so much of that is we're made to connect with each other. And
Yes.
even though, with technology and it, again, everything with social media, we feel more connected, yet we
Hmm.
feel more isolated and lonely
Yeah.
than we ever have.
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I love that. I love that PS and that like again, sort of identifying what's the root thing that I'm seeking first, and
Yes.
whether that's pleasure or stress reduction first. I think that's going to be very insightful for people. But yeah, this connection piece because again, yeah, there's like sometimes pseudo connection, and sometimes it feels meaningful to connect. And even you and I, connecting over virtually feels good. It's different than being in person and having a hug and having physical touch. Like for our nervous system, it's something different. And so really again tending to our bodies like the animal beings that they are and the primal beings that they are, that they need that physical touch. And how much simpler it can all be, if we have people around us that are loving and supportive. And yeah, let's go snuggle for for 5 minutes. Let's have a 30-second hug and
Mhm.
just allow yourself to breathe with that other person. And that co-regulation that gets to happen is so powerful, and it's free. You don't have to go pay for that. So
Exactly. No, I'm so glad you brought that up because that's one thing I have noticed, especially with like tantrums and everything, is
mhm.
that co-regulation, it does help both of us. And I'm like,
Yeah.
can we
Yeah.
just can I give you a hug? Do you need a hug? And
Hmm.
sometimes they're like, no, I do not. I need space, and that's okay. Sometimes I
Hmm.
need space. I get it. But when we do, it both of us just like naturally,
Yeah.
and for me, it's hard to let all the big emotions go and just sit there and be with it because
Hmm.
that was trained out of me. So like I'm
Yeah.
practicing that with them. But the co-regulation piece can be very, very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it makes me think again of that exhale because like even like
Yes.
hearing you describe it, like my body exhales. And so it's like anytime our body has that spontaneous exhale, that's a sign of our nervous system discharging some energy. And so that's one of the other things, like when you're doing somatic work with people, or you can start to kind of track it in your own system, there are ways that our body communicates, like we're discharging some of that stress energy. And so that might be that spontaneous exhale. It might be temperature changes in your body. You might start to shake or tremble a little bit, have some like twitching. You might have some tears, and maybe they're not connected to emotion at all. Maybe they're just like a pure physical discharge, but like we're like so scared of like, what do these tears mean? And again, if I'm a big feeler, like, oh, what is this story? It's like, but sometimes it's just a pure physical discharge that your body is trying to regulate and to
Mhm.
discharge some of that survival energy that we walk around with all day.
Yes. Speaking of exhaling, one of my go-to ways to regulate myself, especially in those very big emotional moments
Mhm.
is doing the breathing, but focusing on the longer exhale.
Mhm.
Can you
Mhm.
explain why that's
Mhm.
important?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's again, tells me that you're again more wired, or at the moment is more wired in that more sympathetic part of your nervous system. So we
Mhm.
have a sympathetic part and then we have a parasympathetic part. So our sympathetic part is that fight or flight energy. So it's active, it's up here, it's mobilizing. It can be really helpful if we need to survive, a threat, but we don't want to live there all day. And so to again shift downward, we want to have that down regulation. We can shift that a little bit by connecting intentionally with our breath. And so if you do just notice what your normal inhale is, and then just invite your exhale to be a little bit longer. And I know some people like to do like counting and have numbers with it. Fine if that works for you. I usually just encourage people to just notice their inhale and then just invite that exhale to be a little bit longer. So it's more gentle. It's less like rigid and control of like, because sometimes we get really controlling about our breath and then we can't down regulate.
Yes,
So it's just
okay,
like,
thank you. Because I definitely have noticed that. I'm like, ah,
yeah, yeah.
it
So it's
makes
just
sense.
like, let me just like invite it to be a little bit longer. And so when we allow it to be a little bit longer, that's what activates the parasympathetic part of our nervous system. That just allows us to come down a little bit. And it's actually the opposite. If you are struggling more in like oof, I'm dissociated, I'm disconnected, I'm a little numbed out, I need to like get myself some energy before this next meeting that I have. You can do it in reverse. So actually, inviting the inhale to be a little bit longer and then your exhale to be a little bit shorter. And so again, yeah, we can kind of work with the breath to
Yeah.
help shift our nervous system state. And that's a lot of times the work that I do with somatic work is it's less of the intentionally shifting things and it's more just noticing what's happening. And so that's why that spontaneous exhale is so important to notice. And so anytime I'm working with somebody and they I'm like, oh, that's cool. What'd you notice there? Did you notice that breath? And just like bringing their attention to what their body naturally did. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, I did feel that. And
Yeah,
noticing the after effect of that just spontaneous exhale.
interesting. Oh, that's fascinating. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we did not cover that you would like to touch on real fast? Or
I mean, I think the only thing I will say, because sometimes in conversations like this, we spend so much time talking about like how challenging it is because sometimes this is hard work, and this is not for the faint of heart. And this is not a short, easy biohacking path. And so sometimes you're like, oh gosh, is it even worth it? And I would like to leave with a message of like, it is so worth it on the other side to do this work. And um, as hard as it might feel in the beginning, it won't be that way forever. And to be on the other side of really being connected to who you are and connected to what's important and living life from that place and making decisions from that place and feeling confident in the decisions that you make and not as impacted by the external world, like it really is worth it. So,
yes, oh, could not agree more. And I mean, I like to think of it. I'm a very physically active person. I've always been athletic, and if you think of it like an athlete, like this is just another muscle that you have to
yes,
strengthen. And some
yes.
of us have never used this muscle before. Some of us just haven't used it in a long time. Some of us
Mhm.
use it once in a while. Who knows? But it's
Yes.
really just, if you think of it just like we're strengthening a muscle, you can't all of a sudden, work on this muscle for a week and the muscle's good to go forever. So it is
Hmm.
something that is continuous. And, like you said with the compass, like you'll need to look at the compass throughout your life at different stages, different, north, south, east, west, depending on what you're going through and where you are, you're going to have a different place that you want to look at. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the muscle analogy. And like I talk about the self trust muscle. And just like you said, there is muscle memory also. And so once you do a lot of this work, even if you get off track for a while, you come back, you're like, oh, yeah, yeah, I know how to do this. This is, so there is, yeah, there's just a lot of benefit to doing this work and knowing that you're going to have those muscles built up.
yes. And one thing I know that you and I both really align on, you've talked about it in the book, is just it's all about the small, consistent showing
Hmm.
up. Do not
Hmm.
look for the big, crazy stuff and going all in.
Yep.
Like, find one thing that you're really focusing on and just chip away at that because that
Yes.
not only is easier going into it, but that's what's going to help long term. You see
Yep.
the results and have it stick. Like you said, have that self trust muscle be really strengthened, is just keep chipping away at it slow by slow.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't have said it better.
Yay.
Mm.
Well,
Thank
how
you
can
so
people
much.
find you and Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So the book is called "You Can Trust Yourself." So it is modern tools and ancient wisdoms for oh my gosh, there it is right there. So unlock the wise woman within using modern tools and ancient wisdom. So you can find that right now. Amazon is the best place. You can also reach out to me to buy directly, but Amazon is the quickest, easiest way to get it. And then yeah, I've got some other things up my sleeve that I'm working on. You can check out the Self Trust podcast if you want to hear updates about what's coming down the pipeline. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm so honored to have you here, and thank you for all the work you've been doing. And I know that this is going to change so many people's lives. So
Mm,
if you've never heard of it, please go buy it. It is truly going to be life changing. So thank you so much.
mm.
I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.